On page 7, Gisha Kaulesa, in a follow-up to the story that broke on Friday with regard to the mom who,
Super mom, I call her.
Yeah, she
Super
basically,
mom.
she did what it took to protect her daughter from a possible predator. And Diana Mahabir Wyatt is saying that the mother is a hero. She said, and this is the story on page 7, if the mother who executed vigilante justice on the PH taxi driver who had made advances on her 11-year-old daughter had depended on the police to take action, she would still be waiting. That's according to Diana Mahabir Wyatt, who hails the woman as a hero. Quote, I am not quite sure who in Trinidad, certainly not any parent, would have criticized her for what she did. In a case like that, what is a mother supposed to do to protect her daughter and other children? But over the weekend, there were some people on social media saying that the guy didn't do anything wrong as far as the law says, so that it may look as though the mother and her family and the neighbors who beat him up, they may have to face some sort of charge or something like that, and there may not be any charge to lay against the guy. But then the Children's Authority issued a release over the weekend pointing to the Children's Act while saying that the vigilante aspect of it was not the right way to go. They did indicate that sexual grooming of a child is a crime under the Children's Act. So what the guy was doing in terms of, getting the girl's phone number, saying, can I go over? I want to see you and all of that, that probably could be considered grooming based on what took place in the incident, and also if we are to go by what the Children's Act says.
But I find this ironic.
He's 29 years old. There's an 18-year difference between him and this little girl, right? What is he asking for her phone number for? What is he coming to check her in the middle of the night for?
But do you know the legal fraternity? Well, not the legal. The police services and other groups, they set up what is called or known in that circle, that protective circle, as sting operation. They do similar exercises.
Yes.
They set people up to, the mayor of one of the mayors of Atlanta and so on, the cocaine thing, people come in there, they set things up. So I don't understand the thought here that that he didn't commit an act. He pursued
exactly. His intentions were clear.
The young girl, and he came at the house.
That's right.
Because I read something, or I heard a report or something. A legal attorney said that probably there's no charges to be laid against the man and all this.
That's insanity. Any proper reading of the Children's Act would tell you that the guy.
What if the story was different today? That they found, she was missing since Friday, and they found the body.
Or suppose the child really was home alone, and there was nobody home to protect her, and he would have had his wicked way with her. We've gone on the line with us, attorney at law and member of the Police Service Commission, Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, Jessime, and good morning
good morning,
to
Mr.
your
George.
panel. Good morning, Dr. Wayne. Good
Your
morning,
Honor.
Jason.
Great mind. Yes, sir. I'm going to plead my case before you this morning. Yeah. You probably heard already snippets of have laid my case before you, sir, because I don't. You know, right, from your legal years of experience and so on. There have been cases, I'm not sure about local, but internationally, where they had these dragnet cases, and the CIA and so on will set these, what we'd call traps, if we want to call them traps, sting operation, and they would lure the perpetrators into whether it's drugs or guns and ammo and so on. Isn't this a similar situation, Mr. George? Can this be paralleled because, after all, the perpetrator was apprehended?
Well, I will give an example that I think everybody in Trinidad and Tobago ought to be familiar with. If we think of the case of Buju Banton, the singer, if you recall, the way he was caught was because of their surveillance, and the authorities in the U.S. suspected him of being involved in drug trafficking. They then set up a sting operation whereby they contacted him to make a deal for the transaction of drugs. and he did show up and with all the necessary paraphernalia, and therefore he was arrested and charged. So the point is, one has to look at the intention. In other words, the same way you can have something, a charge such as attempted murder, where you intend to murder somebody, so you may chop them severely about the body and, they suffer life-threatening injuries, but the person may survive, so therefore you clearly had an intention to murder them. Then similarly, in those circumstances, the authorities have been able to say, well, look, you certainly had the intention to engage in this type of activity. Secondly, I saw actually just last week on one of the Crime Watch programs in the U.S., it may have been, I think, out of Chicago, where a former Army officer, right, who had served in the Army, and then now he was, I think, a volunteer with one of the police departments. And the thing is, interestingly enough, I think he was working with one of the child protection units, and he himself turned out to be a major pedophile. And the police actually were able to intercept and set up a situation whereby he was entrapped. They were able to get him come into the girl's house. It was a 13-year-old girl, and when he was arrested, he said, well, he just wanted to take her for pizza, So then they were able to show the very same thing, the text messages and, the conversations that he'd been having with the girl. And they asked him, they said, well, does this concern pizza? Because he had mentioned about, wanting to shower with her and, all these things, So when you go into that, how then can you say that that's an innocent conversation or that's an innocent
There's
scenario?
nothing innocent about that conversation.
I actually would certainly like to publicly applaud the mother. I would certainly give her all the praises, because I think that it is a stance like this that parents need to take rather than being passive. I think we need to take active steps to protect our children, and I think she deserves all the praise instead of, persons trying to criticize or castigate her action.
So, Mr. George
certainly did the right thing.
So, Mr. George, when a defense uses a term entrapment as if that is illegal, that means what in a context like what you're just speaking with Buju Banton and this sort of situation?
Right. Well, in the U.S., it is permissible. It is permissible in the U.S. because their specific laws deal with that, and they do have that scenario where they cater for that. Now, the thing is, depending on which charge the police are looking at, if they were looking at anything, I actually haven't heard anything official from them. I don't know if you all have gotten any official position from the Police Service of Trinidad and Tobago.
I haven't seen anything yet.
Which I find a bit disturbing, because I would think that given the time that this has occurred, they ought to have, come out with some kind of statement as to what's their position one way or the other.
But with regard to charges and so on, the Children's Authority basically came out on Friday and stated clearly under the Children's Act of 2012, they're saying that a child is defined as someone under 18, and there are severe penalties in relation to various offenses, including sexual touching, sexual grooming, and sexual penetration of a child. Sexual grooming would be that seducing that would have been taking place, chatting up the child in the car and then chatting up the child further on WhatsApp. Yes,
and I think clearly that's where the police ought to be focusing their attention, because we have these specific situations covered here. Because when one looks at the context of the conversation, obviously in his mind he thought he was communicating with the child. It doesn't matter that it was the mother who was the person actually sending the messages. The fact is, at that point, having procured the child's number, having asked the child if she was on WhatsApp, and then now you are sending messages, because remember what the mother said. She said she waited until he contacted her. She didn't initiate the contact, you see. So she waited until he contacted her, and then once he contacted her, she then started, the communication. So therefore, it is clear what the intention was. So it would certainly be a travesty of justice in Trinidad and Tobago if our noble and upright and intelligent police service were to allow this man to be freed without any charges being laid or without him being prosecuted. I would certainly be very disappointed personally if that were to happen.
Just one quick qualification, though. In terms of this, quote, sting operation or case of entrapment that we're looking at here, can the mother and her family get in trouble for doing what they did, since ideally it should have been a police operation to get this guy?
Well, the thing is, in terms of, remember, you do have the power to make a citizen's arrest.
Okay, great.
Okay, so the point is, certainly, I think they would have been very clear in terms of, their right to do so. However, if it is that there were, acts of violence perpetrated on the individual, then, of course, now, while one certainly understands the human element in terms of the anger and outrage that persons would feel, to think that, this person basically has been acting as a predator, pursuing a young child. The thing is, we still ought not to cross the line and inflict that physical violence ourselves. In other words, we ought to then let the law take its course. In other words, sure, you can do the citizen's arrest and apprehend them until the police arrive, but in terms of, beating someone, then, we are really just crossing the line a bit. I don't know if he was beaten or who may have done so, but the point is, I would just say that, up to the point of the citizen's arrest and calling the police for them to come, I would think that you certainly are in the clear, and there's no way that anyone can contemplate, bringing charges against you in such circumstances. Because, first of all, you're in my premises.
Yes.
You are uninvited, because you cannot, an 11-year-old child cannot be the one to give you permission to enter my premises. That's not an adult,
But
so
he can argue that he was invited because that message that he got said, come on over.
Right, but as far as he understood it, that message was from an 11-year-old who has no legal capacity to give you permission to enter the premises. Mm-hmm. You see, so in those circumstances, I think up to the point of the citizen's arrest, then yes, you are clear. And at that point, then yes, of course, the proper course is to hand him over to the police.
Now, Mr. George, coming out of one of our on-air classroom sessions where you've been schooling us in specifically in the arena of evidence versus allegations. I remember coming out of one of the classroom sessions, you emphatically spoke about evidence. Can this evidence, or is there sufficient evidence that this case could stand in a court of law? Can we use the enticement, as it were, of the WhatsApp communication? Will that stand up as bona fide evidence against the perpetrator?
All right, okay, so let's look at Section 21 of the Children's Act. Mm-hmm. It says, where a person causes or incites a child to engage in sexual activity, which is sexual under Section 18 or 19, the person commits an offense. So there they're talking about inciting to commit a sexual activity. So in other words, if it is that you want to lay evidence or put before the court evidence to show the incitement, then clearly the trend of the conversations would be something that you would put as the evidence. Of course, there would be also supporting material in terms of what he may have told the girl in the taxi. He may have made suggestive remarks.
But that cannot be proven. That cannot be proven. No, that might be an allegation.
No, the point is it would be her word. Mm-hmm. If it is that those things were said and the child gives that in testimony, then it will be her word against his if he denies. And then the court or the jury would then have to decide which one they believe. So the point is, it is evidence that you can put before the court, of course, as to credibility and, eventual proof of the matter. That's always a matter for the tribunal or the jury to decide.
In terms of evidence, though, there is the evidence on the telephone, the WhatsApp conversation between the guy and the mother posing as the child. And
yes, there would be that also. He
says, I don't want to park up in your yard so people could see you and me. We could go for a drive and by Hillview and come back.
Right. So
that's just part of that's just part of what I'm reading here.
Right. So in other words, there would always be the question as to, okay, what was your purpose and intention?
That sounds like grooming, doesn't it?
As an adult, what would you want with an 11-year-old child that you don't know, that is not related to you? You just met her, in your taxi as a passenger. Why would you then want to be going to take her for a drive, somewhere where no one can see? What is it you want to do that you don't want anybody to see? So, in other words, there's always a common sense approach that is applied to these things. And, of course, again, I think that's the benefit of retaining the jury system in Trinidad and Tobago, because when one looks at it, there are things that sometimes the common man, the man in the street, understands much more than any legal luminary in terms of the way life functions in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think maybe that's why you've seen such passionate responses in terms of, the suggestions for the abolition of the jury system in Trinidad and Tobago.
So let me introduce into the argument, Mr. George. Was this a one-off situation, or was this young girl being stalked by this taxi driver over a period of time?
That's a good question. And the other question is...
I mean, it's only the facts of the matter will reveal what actually happened there. I don't know. From the evidence, all they spoke of, from what I saw in the newspaper, was this one incident. But, of course, it may possibly be. But, of course, you would need the evidence to establish that.
But apart from that, Martin George, how many times has he done this before? That is the burning question.
That's the other question. That's the other question, you see. And then I think what I saw in the newspaper also was that the mother expressed surprise to know that he actually lived a couple streets away. So, therefore, in other words...
He may have been marking the child.
Exactly. That's what I was introduced. That's why I asked that question, Mr. George.
Yes, I know. You have someone who may actually be a sexual predator for young children. And that is disturbing. That is very disturbing.
Mr. George, the CJ has again pronounced his determination to abolish trials by jury. What are your thoughts on this? Because this is not the first time it has come up, and it is eliciting a lot of passionate yes and no.
Yes. Well, the thing is, I looked at the context of the speech that was delivered, and it appeared to be set against the backdrop of delays and injustice. And that is where I am just having a bit of a difficulty making the connection, in the sense that I'm not sure that I heard, and of course it may be that there are parts in the speech where he did make the connection, in terms of to show that the fact of a matter being before a jury is what actually contributes significantly to the delay in the criminal justice system, because I am not sure that we have statistics to suggest that at all, if you understand me. So to link it to delays in the criminal justice system, unless there is an overwhelming mountain of evidence and statistically proven evidence, because in other words, you need to have a very clear and specific evidence to show that, look, because of the fact that it's before a jury, this is why it is being delayed. I think without that, you start off with a very difficult task of convincing the public in Trinidad and Tobago to abolish jury trials. You've heard in the past people, the man in the street, express very strongly that they wish to retain the jury trial system, because apart from the fact of this is a level at which they can participate, there are things I can tell you from experience that the ordinary person will understand that sometimes the legal luminaries and the learned judges don't have a clue about. If, for instance, a man in the street says, well, look, boy, I always wanted to get a wet man and a GT, Now, to many judges in Trinidad and Tobago, that may make absolutely no sense. They don't know what is a wet man, and they don't know what you mean when you say you GT,
Yes,
so,
indeed.
Well, I don't even know what you... I don't even know what this means.
A wet man is a particular make of car. It's a TIDA.
Okay.
And your GT means you got through to get your TIDA.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Whoa. I just been schooled again. But let me ask you, but Mr. George, but the AG is in the the corner of the CJ. And he said there's legislation that
They've
is
been
about
working
to
on
be
it.
exactly to be presented in the Parliament.
Well, I would think that legislation is something that ought to have some serious public discussion and debate, and I would also think that there would be some sort of consultation with the opposition on that issue, because I think
she's already come out and said
the leader of the opposition already indicate that they are not in favor of it, and I cannot see that legislation being passed without opposition support. So you see, I don't know. It's amazing to me sometimes how political personages function, in the sense that something as divisive as this issue, I would think that you would first secure the support of the other side before indicating that you're planning to go through with it. It's similar to scenarios that occurred with, for instance, legislation concerning the amendments to the police service, the appointment for a police commissioner. I think it's probably because of the lack of initial consultation and consensus, the opposition was determined to try and stymie and frustrate.
Yeah, they dug their heels in.
Initial court action has, created some sort of hiccup there. So I think that these types of matters, instead of us taking this confrontational, partisan approach that, it's us against them, maybe if we try to engage in some kind of meaningful dialogue before, involve the population, also get the views of the people, because this affects the man in the street, this affects the public, because, in other words, people are saying that, look, I have a right to be judged by a jury of my peers. Putting a judge who lives in an ivory tower, who may be totally disconnected from the realities of what goes on the ground, to judge me is not a jury of my peers. It is not fair to me. It is not, so I think there are very, very valid concerns with persons who are opposed to the idea. It does not mean that eventually the public opinion may not be in support of the idea, but the thing is, I think the process by which we, embark upon this, attempt to change it, I think it ought to be more consultative and facilitative rather than a top-down approach. I am going to impose this, and I have drafted legislation, and I am going ahead with this. I don't think that necessarily is the best approach. I mean, of course, I am not a politician, and I stand corrected by all the politicians who, obviously view this otherwise. But, I think that it's something that ought to have a different approach if that's what you're going to try to achieve. And then, as I said, when you look at the fundamental premise upon which it seems to have been posited, that of delays and injustice, then I am not sure. I have also seen, as a corollary to that argument, the statistical backdrop to show that the fact of it being a jury trial,
yes.
that's what it's been put as, that jury trials contribute to delays in the system. And I am not sure that we've seen, a slew of statistical evidence presented in the public domain to back that up. So I think it really needs a whole new rethink, and I'm not sure it's the most urgent or pressing problem for the judiciary or the legal system in Trinidad and
Tobago. The problem is the backlog. The problem is the backlog.
And when you look at it, the majority of the backlog occurs at the magistrate's court level where there's no jury present. That's where, the majority of our criminal cases are stuck and mired in the magistrate's court where there's absolutely no jury present.
And where they're grossly understaffed.
To even talk about delays and then to talk about the jury system, I am not sure that there is a statistical connection that has been established as yet between that. You look at something like the Piarco 1 and Piarco 2 cases going on for more than 10 years. Where are they stuck? Still at the magistrate's court. They haven't even reached before a jury yet. So, to say that you are linking this to the jury trial and that is a way of, easing or facilitating, the speeding up of the justice system. As I say, I am as yet not sure I have seen the link. As I say, it may be there, it may have been presented. I have just not seen it yet. And I would respectfully say that, it's a fundamental part of the argument if you wish to convince the public that it is really contributing to delays.
We've got a caller on the line. Hello, good morning. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning, Jesse.
Good morning.
Yeah, Mr. George, I just want to just make a quick statement. When you look, I am in agreement that changing the jury if they have a good system in place, because when you look at Judy Eros in the United States, the jury and them failed. When they had was to come together and bring a judgment to hang him, they all the jury and them faint out. Now, when we looking at the law has been changed, even from years gone now to a lot of different things. And why now we stuck in one that we don't want to change one, and we want to change the other? So I am in favor if a good justice system come up and want to speed up everything. When the Bible says redeem the time for the days are evil, meaning that we are in bettermenting now, I feel we should go that way. I respect your point of view as a lawyer.
Thanks very much, Laramine. The thing is, though, okay. Martin George.
First of all, I'm not even sure of what was the first example he mentioned there about something about hanging.
But there was some sort of
fainting.
Yeah, there was a case or something where I guess it was a hung jury. They couldn't make a determination whether to give the death penalty or not in that particular case. That's based on what he explained.
Right, but you see, again, Jessime, who are we to be so self-righteous and sanctimonious that we will say that jury system has failed? In other words, and I mean, even if one looks at the example that was mentioned in passing, it may not have been linked directly to the issue, but to the Vindra Naipaul Pullman matter.
That's right.
Who are we to say that the jury failed there? If you understand me, sometimes let's for instance at the O.J. Simpson matter, right? I mean, that is the most glaring example worldwide and internationally known, right? Where it appears to, those who, I guess, may have a certain level of legal training or, expertise, they would say, well, of course, O.J. was guilty. But the jury system, which is the system that we have, that jury system churned up a result that said not guilty. So in other words, we need to respect that, because in other words, that is the view of the man in the street, and that's the system we have, that you are judged by your peers. So whether your peers are right in the eyes of the legal luminaries or the judges or the justices of appeal or whatever, is irrelevant at that stage, because in other words, they are not the judges of that scenario. It's the 12 men and women who are sitting there to determine that issue. So I think we ought to give that respect, because I'll tell you, legal luminaries and judges and magistrates, they may know the law, but the point is that doesn't mean necessarily that they know what the man in the street considers to be justice. And that's a fundamental, I think, mistake we are making in this scenario, where we presume, because we know the law, that we know it all in terms of justice. And I think we need to respect the views of the persons in the street, the persons who are actually the ones who use the justice system, and take on board what they think. And they may totally reject your legal interpretations and your legal explanations and say, hey, listen, at the end of the day, we know what goes on a daily basis, and we agree with this or we disagree with this. And I think at this point, that's the system we have. We ought to respect it. And I am not sure necessarily that is our fundamental source of delays and clogs in the criminal justice system.
Martin George, we're going to have to leave it there for now, but we appreciate you treating us to another classroom session this morning on the Breakfast Roundtable. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Have a good morning.
Yes, sir.
We've been speaking with Martin George, a senior attorney at law and a member of the Police Service Commission, on the Breakfast Roundtable.
Connect with us online at sky995fm.com. Sky995.